Topping today's news, we learned what Caribbean and African leaders accomplished at the summit in Ethiopia. The Prime Minister addresses the issue of ambulances on the Family Islands, a police shooting here in the capital, and Americans remember 9/11 24 years ago. This is your JCN Evening News. I'm Jarino Saunders. Thank you so much for joining us. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Philip Davis returned from Ethiopia, where he attended the second Africa-CARICOM Summit and the Africa Climate Summit. At today's Office of the Prime Minister's press briefing, Acting Press Secretary Keishla Adderley shares some of the accomplishments made while in Ethiopia.
Heads of state and government committed to executing plans for cooperation in areas including trade and investment, improved air and transportation, entrepreneurship, education, scientific research, tourism development, cultural and creative industries. The summit also recognized that despite a shared historical background and deep cultural ties, and bilateral exports between regions currently accounts for less than 3%. Subsequently, the heads of state and government called for increased investment in emerging sectors including finance, communications, and technology. They also committed to the development of maritime and air connectivity and pledged to advance cooperation and capacity building in health through health development, particularly to develop regional capacity to produce medicines, medical supplies, and vaccines. There were also discussions surrounding bolstering the health workforce in the Caribbean and Africa.
The summit brought together leaders from Africa and the Caribbean alongside key global financial leaders, including representatives from the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, African Development Bank, Caribbean Development Bank, and the Afri-Exim Bank. In the wake of much uproar with the continued practice of Bahamians who fall ill while on the Family Islands having to be taken to the airport or to the clinic via a private vehicle as opposed to an ambulance, such an incident taking place on Long Island on Monday when elderly resident Brenda Wells was transported to an air ambulance on the back of a flatbed truck in the rain. While speaking at the opening of the Cell Collabs and Live Well medical facility on Wednesday, Prime Minister Philip Davis, just back from Ethiopia, addressed those concerns.
I'm also advised that an ambulance procured for Long Island will be sent because no Bahamian should be carried on the back of a truck when their life is in danger. But that was our life. I mean, we have procured ambulances. We have begun training of more EMS personnel because just getting the ambulance alone, and that's what we found out. We got about 15 new ambulances, but the challenge is we didn't have EMS personnel to be able to take these ambulances along. And so we have trained and began training many of them.
In the Long Island case, it was said that while 2 ambulances are on the island, there is no emergency medical technician team to operate the ambulances. Last year, the government announced that it was partnering with the Royal Bahamas Police Force to have reserve police officers on the Family Islands learn to operate the standard shift ambulances. The announcement was criticized by the official opposition. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister also sought to address those who have criticized the government's efforts to provide proper medical health care throughout the Family Islands.
Upgraded Family Island clinics, many of which had gone without improvements for decades. We expanded telemedicine so that a patient in Nago or Meguana could be seen by a specialist in Nassau. We trained and upskilled Bahamian health professionals so our own people can deliver world-class care. And we built on the National Health Insurance Program. Today, thousands of Bahamians are enrolled in NHI, receiving care and coverage that was once out of their reach.
Prime Minister Philip Davis. Police informed media today that shortly before 10 a.m., a shooting incident occurred on a police compound here in New Providence. The particulars are that an officer is alleged to have accidentally discharged a firearm, injuring another officer. As a result, the injured officer was taken to the hospital, where he is currently receiving medical care. At the time, his injuries were said to be non-life-threatening. The circumstances surrounding this incident are being actively investigated. The Trump administration recently announced that immigrant visa applications by Haitians to the United States can only be processed at the U.S. Embassy, Nassau. Subsequently, the government of the Bahamas announced that Haitians seeking to enter the Bahamas for the purpose of U.S. visa applications will not be granted entry for that purpose. Well, in a written statement on Wednesday, Botich Edmond, former Haitian ambassador to the United States, is urging the Haitian government to formally request the United States Department consider the possibility of establishing a regional U.S. consular in Cape Haitian with a focus on processing immigrant visa applications. He explained the current arrangement having to travel to another country like the Bahamas is too costly for the average Haitian. Edmond said a U.S. consular in Cape Haitian would represent a practical, cost-effective, and humane solution. According to the Office of the Prime Minister, today, Prime Minister Philip Davis will review the U.S. visa issue in full and report to the nation at a later date. And finally, in this segment, on this date in 2001, some 24 years ago, 4 planes flying over the eastern portion of the United States were seized simultaneously by hijackers. They were then used as giant guided missiles to crash into landmark buildings in New York and Washington, D.C. 2 planes hit the Twin Towers that eventually collapsed. A 3rd plane destroyed a portion of the Pentagon, the headquarters for the U.S. military, and a 4th plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. A total of 2,977 people lost their lives in that incident. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back following these commercials.